My guest today is Dr. Michael Wood Jr. Many of you may know who he is because he gained notoriety as a retired Baltimore police officer who was brutally honest about his actions as well as his fellow police officers' actions while on duty, and how it pertained to police policy and calling for reform on that policy. Now, today we discuss police policy and whether or not it's actually racist in nature, and how that might relate to crime in a community versus violence and what the police are actually policing for. We talk about the correlating factors that actually cause violence. Now, a couple weeks ago, I had Dr. Carl Hart on my show, who is calling for the decriminalization of all drugs, not just soft drugs like marijuana, but things like crack, cocaine, heroin, you name it. He's calling for the decriminalization of all that. So I wanted to pick Dr. Wood's brain about this decriminalization of drugs, since he actually worked on the other side of the coin. He was a police officer who was in the front lines, who was investigating these things and faced with them every day.
Quite frankly, it's kind of unusual.
It's quite Franklin.
Got it. Quite Franklin.
A couple weeks ago, I was talking to Dr. Hart, and obviously the book that he wrote was Drug Use for Grownups, and he basically wants to decriminalize all drugs. I wanted to start with this premise. I wanted to get your thoughts on this because he presented one side of the case. I wanted to know kind of where you stood on it. And then I figured we're just going to kind of snowball from there and just get into a bunch of fun conversations about whatever.
I'm open to anything, my brother.
All right, rock on then. Dr. Hart's book, I read the book, and he made some good arguments for, the decriminalization of drugs and things like that. You having actually been on the front lines of the battles with this kind of stuff, give me your thoughts on this and the way that, the way that police forces or the way that policy is set up to handle these things. And we'll go from there. Give me some thoughts.
Is policy set up to handle these things? I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know.
that might have been the false premise there. There's actually a plan. I'm not sure there's actually a plan.
Well, let me say this. Whether policy is set up to handle these things properly.
One of the things that really struck me in Baltimore was quickly seeing how fast everything is exactly the same, with the officers doing the same things on the same corners. I'm not kidding you. Anyone can go back and you can watch the movies Homicide that was on TV. You can watch The Wire. You can watch The Corner. These are all Baltimore-based shows from the 60s, the 70s, and the late 90s. And they are all talking about the exact same corners, the exact same scenes. Everything looks exactly the same. And there my dumbass is listening to my bosses tell me to do the exact same shit I saw them do in those movies. And it's like, this is so surreal. What are you talking about? This obviously doesn't work.
Yeah, nothing changes if nothing changes,
Right. And so here I am. I fall into it. I can see that none of this stuff works at all. But the way you get through in the Baltimore Police Department, and most police departments, any kind of organization has to judge its employees by some type of metric. And the metric that you do with a cop is arrest. And when you're in a place like Baltimore, does arresting for jaywalking count? No, bro, not really. This is like the most violent city in America, and you're going to tell me that you're going to arrest somebody for jaywalking? That's nonsense. So we kind of get into the whole mentality of guns and drugs being tied together, all the homicides, because one of the key issues is that police respond to violence. They do not respond to demographics. I don't understand why I can't get this through people's head. Police should not be killing. 20% of the people that police kill should not be senior citizens. That's ridiculous. Police do not respond to demographics. They respond to areas of violence. So in these areas of violence, you're being judged.
I'm going to assume then that the violence, demographics match a certain amount of violence, right? Like, you're not going to have violence in communities where the elderly exist, for example.
Well, generally no, because one of the strongest demographics to violence is being a male between the ages of 16 and 24.
Okay.
That's who commits the vast majority of violence. So if you're going to pick out a demographic, it's definitely young males.
But that's a correlation, not a causation, obviously.
No, that's definitely a causation.
The demographic is a causation.
Being male is a causation.
Really?
So
police
don't respond to you being a male. They respond to the fact that males commit the vast majority of violence. We are programmed. We are genetic to respond with violence. And to a certain aspect, we're going to be the types that get in combat. And even socially, We're going to be pushed towards combat. I mean, I'll throw my wife under the bus real quick on this before. There's been times where she's been a little feisty before in public and like yelled at somebody. And I'm like, hey, this dude might be having a bad day. I don't have an obligation to get in a fist fight because you can't control your mouth. So that's going to happen in real life. Guys are going to get in fights because of things that girls do in interacting with one another. And that's kind of the societal role along with the genetic propensity for violence. So, of course, and the capability to cause it. So if my wife punches me in the face as hard as she can, obviously the severity is not going to be the same as the reverse.
Explain to me why being a male is a causing factor rather than a correlating factor when it comes to violence.
Testosterone.
Okay, I'll give you that.
I mean, we could say testosterone is correlated to violence if you want. But, I mean, we take out the testosterone, the violence drops dramatically. The correlation's so strong, I think we can give testosterone and go ahead and bump that up the causation.
It would be interesting. I just random thought here on this. It would be interesting to see with everything that's going on with a lot of these hormone therapies and how that like testosterone is being implemented and whatnot could cause.
No question. A transsexual will get more aggressive. Absolutely.
Really? There's data to support this.
Yeah, if you're transitioning from female to male and you're taking testosterone boosters, you will get more aggressive. I mean, that's kind of the basis for the classic roid rage.
If we do we actually have data on testing like hormone levels, like at what levels
absolutely
the violence
yeah. So it all correlates and it ties in so close. You're talking about a causation. Like technically lead is a correlation to violence, but it's a causation. I mean, when something affects your medulla oblongata and it affects your impulse decision making process and you're a male and you have strength, then yeah, that's going to lead to violence. I mean, yeah, it's definitely a causation.
Interesting. Okay, so let me then.
So all violence is biological. Have you heard me say that?
All violence is biological?
All violence is biological. All acts of aggression are different things. So one of the key things to separate violence and aggression. So aggression is say you have a legitimate belief that I'm coming to kill you. You killing me is not an act of your biology going crazy. That is a rational decision that you have to make in order to come out with a better outcome, which is you surviving and your family being safe. That's not violence. Violence is when that you have that roid rage or that temporary psychosis, when a lot of times you hear people saying, I can't believe Fred did that. I have known Fred for 42 years. And so the important thing is remember that can happen to me or you. Violence is really a temporary psychosis that breaks all of your human innate objects. The thing that separates humanity from all other species is we are the most cooperative thing that has ever existed. And violence actually goes against our own survival. That's why we can't even see reality. We don't perceive reality because finding out reality gets you killed. So we are these. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, when you say violence, I'll speak for the listeners, but my mind as well automatically goes to, like that, you use the term roid rage or whatever, like that kind of, that reptilian response to something that happens on the street. We bump into each other. Now my biology is going to take over. But what about more methodical violence, say like serial killers, Jeffrey Dahmer like?
Temporary doesn't have to be limited to a 5-minute time frame. Yeah, I mean, just like any mental illness, you can be in this state for a great long period of time. One of the easiest ones to look at is there was this guy who had pedophilia. And he went in, he got arrested because he was downloading some images and he told the cops and they of course they didn't believe him at first, but he's like, dude, something is wrong. I have never felt like this my entire life. It's like my brain's all messed up. They did a CAT scan on him. He had a brain tumor present on a section of his brain. They take the brain tumor out and it's completely gone. It's because pedophilia is a crossing of the wires between the protective state and the sexual state of love. So a motherly love or a fatherly love versus a sexual love. It's those wires getting crossed, and those wires can be crossed a myriad of ways.
So when this gentleman had a tumor, they removed the tumor, and let's just say that hypothetically speaking, that does completely fix the problem.
Yeah.
Is he considered rehabbed at that point? I'm assuming the system still forces him to.
He was. I mean, he was let go for that special case. But
really?
The thing is that's really the case for everyone that I'm talking about. If we're not talking about aggression, we're literally talking about somebody that obviously went insane because they did this act that went against all rational thought. I mean, that's why almost all murders are interfamiliarity. So they're people I mean, if a wife dies, it's the husband that did it, 90-some% of the time. It's always somebody because that person happened to be around you when you flipped, or that you're already in some kind of situation where there's a mutual combat where you're in an aggression state. Just like, I mean, like combat, like battle. War is not violence. That's aggression. Some little kid getting thrown in there at 17 years old and saying, fight for your life, that's not that kid having a temporary psychosis other than maybe fear.
Are these your definitions of aggression and violence? I like them, by the way, because it...
Absolutely.
Okay. Because I was like, I've never heard this. I've been called a violent man because of my career choice, right? And
not
like,
at all. That's aggression.
Yeah,
100%.
exactly. But I don't even think I'm very aggressive.
When
actually.
you're in the ring, you're aggressive, dude. I don't know what the kind of theory you've been telling yourself to justify punching another dude in the face, but
I have to tell myself something. I'm a good Christian man. Like, I can't just like aggressively punch people in the face for no reason. Well, you know,
you did it for career advancement, Rich, and so did I.
I got to put food on my table.
Right. I mean, I did the same thing.
Whatever makes me sleep at night.
That's circling back to how this even got all started. So being a cop with drugs, you're being judged by arrest. So you're going out there in these areas where drugs and violence are, and you're being judged by arrest. So here's where violence takes place. We're going to put cops there to quell the violence. And the only way we know how to do this, because we do not even look at the difference between violence and aggression in the law, we only look at the outcome and say, this is violence, somebody got hurt, all we have to do is go lock up that offender, and all these situations will be solved. We don't have to take out the lead poisoning. We don't have to stop the cultural issues. We don't have to worry about the fact they don't have, that they're in a mutual combat state. All those things are forgotten. So the only thing you're judged by is arrest. So my whole career was being advanced by going out there and locking people up for the things that I saw, because a cop can only lock up what he sees. So you put me in this neighborhood where there are bad drug dealers and violent motherfuckers. Yes, but the problem is I'm not there to arrest just violent motherfuckers. I'm there to arrest absolutely anything I see. So that's how you get people like Freddie Gray, and you get the like real double victim of these environments. The real victim isn't the 99% of the time the dude getting killed by the police was a neighborhood problem, and everybody in that neighborhood is like, glad that dude's gone. Let's be honest about it. But the reason the reason that other people are getting caught up in that, those are like the victims we've really got to care about. This guy, like a Freddie Gray, is not only resorting to drug dealing, he's running around afraid of all the people that are going to rob him. He's got to be afraid of the cops locking him up. And he's essentially a victim to the society's, the community's response to the violence. And he's a victim of those violent people that he fucking lives next to.
Going back to some of Dr. Hart's ideas, if we were to decriminalize all drugs, how would that change the landscape of things in these neighborhoods? Because now you're like, it seems like a lot of the arrests that you would be making based on these drugs, and I would assume there's at least a correlation, maybe a causation, you can go into that, on drugs as it pertains to violence. But if they were suddenly legalized, government regulated, and accessible to people who needed them, then how would that change the landscape of how the police would fight crime in a city like Baltimore, for example?
I fight with this because optimistically, you would like to say, well, then we won't be putting those kids in, because it's like the snowball. So the arrest is a compounding problem. Like the key problems are their socioeconomic situation, the fact that they're getting lead poisoned, they're going down the wrong path because of other societal issues, and the police are a part that kind of snowballs that, makes it more difficult. So if you don't have $50 for a parking ticket, and the cops are only looking to find people in your area, again, I can only be around those certain areas. And then you're kind of like, they don't have $50. So then they maybe go out and deal, and then they get arrested again. So you kind of get like these snowballing effects. I think you're putting people into with stress and kind of the socioeconomic links to crime. But I'm not, I really question if police will change. The history shows me that the subject just changes. So like right now, I mean, this is when I'm talking about state violence, I'm telling you about how they treat violent people, not because I particularly care about how they treat violent people or how they treat people that are committing crimes. It's because this system will carry over to you. You can see it with mass mandates and with police going out there and literally enforcing against people's liberties and freedoms right now. I mean, key freedoms that we have as individuals. And so you can see how that system just will shift. And I really doubt that the American system of policing will actually improve that much.
Yeah, I mean, because it just seems to me that obviously, like backing up to what you said, if the police are going into neighborhoods and arresting for things that they see, and half of the things that they see are no longer illegal, because if drugs, for example, were government mandated, and I'm playing the devil's advocate here to create a conversation.
No, you're right.
A conversation.
I mean, this is the police argument. You'll see this. The police will argue, well, we shouldn't legalize cannabis, even though we know it does no harm to society because it will make catching violent people more difficult.
Why would it make?
Because we use weed as an easy link because it's easy to smell and find.
But so if you take drugs out of the equation, for example, like, then there's a lot of violence correlated with drugs, with the sale of drugs, with territory, all that kind of stuff.
Let's say with black market.
I'm assuming that you mean then there would be black markets existing for these drugs.
So prohibition had the same thing, right? So if we would have essentially been saying if we legalize alcohol, then everything will be fine. Well, then if we legalize all the other, like, isn't it just like, I feel like that's the same pattern.
But by legalizing alcohol, we don't have any kind of territorial disputes or violent acts over.
Right, but I mean, it shifted to other drugs because alcohol just is a drug. And so if you eliminate the other drugs, won't it just shift to something else?
But what would that other thing be then? I mean,
I don't know.
Theory, yeah, okay. I get what you're saying with that. I mean, maybe it would, but then I'll ask you this: worth trying or not?
Yes.
Because when you look at places like Portugal, for example, like Portugal's had a very progressive stance on drugs and how they handle that stuff.
Wait, let me interrupt that though. They're not progressive because the idea of drugs being illegal is entirely new.
But in today's landscape, the thought of making decriminalizing them is. And there was a difference between drugs being decriminalized and legalized.
I'm legalize and regulate for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, because I just think for the quality wise. So even just people are generally overdosing. So like I think that when somebody buys heroin and they overdose because it's fentanyl, I think that's murder.
Yeah.
The person didn't go to buy fentanyl; they went to buy heroin.
Yeah.
So when you have those kind of things, I think just the harm reduction of moving things over to a pharmaceutical area where most heroin addicts aren't going to overdose on heroin if they know how much is in it. The whole goal isn't to overdose and kill yourself in case they get to the next high or to try for that first one again, really. So I don't know. I think it'd be a lot easier, at least in our harm reduction aspect, to go ahead and do it.
This is what I said to him when I was having that discussion. I've never drank in my life ever. Like I've never done any drugs. I've never even had alcohol in my life. And so for me to become like progressive in my thinking by today's standards of progressive, even though we've established that it's not really progressive, but to be progressive in my thinking, to think like, this wouldn't necessarily be a bad idea to look at places like a Portugal or Barcelona or something like that, is, for me, it's thinking outside of the box, obviously, because growing up, obviously, and everything you correlate everything drugs is bad. Like it's anti-goal, the crime, violence, all that kind of stuff. So to step outside of that and say, maybe that would work. That's the thing. I think somebody on the flip side of this would say like, well, look, we legalized alcohol, but look at how many addicts we have that we deal with alcohol. And so, I think that would be the counter argument to something like this. You know what I mean?
That's why I want it in the pharmaceutical realm. Alcohol obviously wouldn't survive in the pharmaceutical realm because no doctors are going to prescribe alcohol. So I'm not really sure how that would go.
No, the thought of that as I was thinking about discussing this with you, I'm like, well, then how would that affect violence and rates of violence on the streets? I mean, because if you're using something like weed since it's been called a gateway drug into finding violence, and that's suddenly eliminated off the streets, and every other drug with it for that matter.
Well, drugs are correlated to violence all around the world, but only where the drugs are illegal.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's actually the policy of drugs being illegal that's correlated to violence, not the drugs themselves. I mean, even if you think about like areas where we always forget that there are areas like Africa that are in the middle of nowhere that are not operating on the same system as we are, but those are still human beings. So everything that is happening there, those are the universal truths. So, I mean, it's like when we talk about poverty, I'm always objecting to the idea that poverty is correlating to violence. I'm like, what in the hell are you people talking about? There are literally entire towns and tribes in Africa that are as poor can be and have almost zero violence.
I've traveled like on my travel show with my team. We've traveled all over the world together. We've been to some of the some of the worst slums in the world. Like we were in Charapend in Pakistan. And this is like one of the poorest places on earth that you could possibly go. Friendliest people in the world. Not one point in time did I ever feel like afraid for my life or in danger or anything like that. People there are very welcoming. They, somebody from the outside. We actually spent the day in the slum playing a game, learning the game of cricket. I use this as an opportunity for these kids to teach me how to play cricket and playing a game of cricket with the local people there. And so everywhere that I've been, the poorest communities in the world, people that have to walk 2 miles every other day or 2 hours, there's 2 hours. Like we were in Thailand in this Amkoi, this village up in the mountains, and they had to walk 2 hours like every third day to get fresh water because of location and poverty and stuff like that. But it's like, they're the happiest people in the world. Life is simple.
Right. It's not remotely correlated.
I grew up poor in the U.S. Like I grew up on subsidized lunches and food stamps and things like that. And I grew up in bad neighborhoods, like really bad neighborhoods. And so I know what it's like to be poor, and that makes me very appreciative of the things that I have today. But even in these poor communities that I grew up, I never felt in danger of any kind, like in any more danger than I feel in the suburbs of Cincinnati at this point in my life. But you did make a good point about it's the wealth gap that exists in these places. Like when you mix the rich and the poor.
Okay. So the second one is income inequality or resource inequality. That's what you're getting to.
Yeah.
So it's not poverty. It's literally what I was talking about, that biological response. There is a biological response in the ape that is the human being when we see another ape that has a whole bunch of shit that we can't have. Now, we really don't care if that ape has a lot of shit and we don't see it. But if we see it, it elicits a response and at our core, and it makes us violent.
I mean, not that I ever got violent, but when I was in college, I used to valet cars at this really nice restaurant in downtown Cincinnati called La Maisonette. And I can remember valeting these cars, and just the people that I would help like get out of these cars and stuff, just the upper echelon of society, they would just look at you like hired help. Like as if like, don't touch me,
Sure.
and wipe that door handle off when you're done, please. And that
it's making me think of Dave Chappelle's couch skit,
Yeah, exactly.
And that's how you feel,
There are in this world, if you want to like think about like different races and all that kind of stuff, and white privilege and all that kind of stuff. Like I've always thought that there are the haves and there are the have-nots. If I was to, for example, be invited to a royal dinner in England, you would clearly know right away that I was not part of any kind of royalty.
Absolutely out of place.
And I would be treated as such, despite yes. the color of my skin. And so, this is one of the things that I've always told people, like, there are the haves in this world and the have-nots. There are the elites and the non-elites. And I'm not part of that elite group. I've been fortunate enough for a non-elite to make some decent money in my life. And for that, I'm grateful. But I'm still not part of that group.
Still not one of them, dude.
No,
it just doesn't work that way.
But you know what though? I'm proud. I'm proud not to be. Like I'm
with you.
I'm a blue collar man. I like getting dirty, and even to this day, like I work a corporate job, and I just my entire life, if I wasn't an athlete, like I'm hands on. I was a high school teacher, and it's about being in the trenches and actually doing the work, and it's just the way that I'm geared. So I don't even think I could be that way. If I woke up with $1 billion tomorrow, I wouldn't know what to do with it. I would.
Right.
Give a lot of it away to help people, I guess, or set up programs or whatever it is that I would do. Let's move to the number one correlate, because this is the one thing that really caught my mind, because I'm very big into health. If you know anything about my brand, like it's like my nutrition is something that carried me through the later years of my competitive years. And so talk about the number one correlate of violence.
Kind of mind-blowing when I saw it. One of the key aspects of why I got into my education was because I was tired of the police department looking like a bunch of idiots. Like I wanted to professionally improve and do my job and know what was really causing violence. And it's crazy that when you get into the science, it is 100% in your face that the strongest correlate to violence in modern America is lead poisoning. And anyone can look this up right now. You can go to the internet and you can type in lead and violence correlation, and you will see graphs of the amount of lead in an environment and the violence rate in that environment absolutely paralleling within like 16 to 18, 16 to 20 year timeframes. I can explain why that is, but there's an offset to the delay. And so basically what happens is back in the day, what we used to, the 90s was in the late 80s was a very violent period in American history where we often associate this with the crap epidemic and the rise of aggressive policing and stuff like this. And this is entirely, there are no correlates that tie into that. What ties into that is that in 1974, the CAFE standards went into effect. And what these standards did is they were a federal program to take lead out of our gasoline. And once we did that, we took a nationwide, the entire country, lead gone out of the air. And what happened is in that 16 to 20 year delay, violence just plummeted in America. And one reason this has nothing to do with policing, despite claims, is this was universal. It didn't matter whether you were in Podunk, Ohio, Iowa, or you were in New York City. Violence just skyrocketed, just dropped everywhere you saw once this lead was out of the air.
Yeah, but
and where you ended up,
wouldn't there be varying amounts of lead in varying places? I mean, for example, I would imagine that the amount of lead in a New York City, for example, would be different than Podunk, Ohio.
Sure. So one of the things that you will have to remember is it's kind of like in the suburbs, you'll have like a balance, but the poorer you are, you're also going to be around it too. So like farmers are going to be sucking in leaded gas all day long if they're working out in the middle of nowhere. So maybe a suburbia had a bit of more of a protection, and suburbia gets in protection later on too. So it's another reason why violence is lower in suburbia is a different reason, but we'll get to that real quick. And so what happens is, of course, so in urban environments where there's more cars, obviously you're going to have more lead in the air, so you're going to have a greater propensity for or greater amount. I don't know what word I'm actually looking for. But so what happens is when a child you have to be a child. And so this is why kids eating lead paint is such a big deal, and everyone knows about this. So when you ingest lead as a child, it changes your biology and it makes you violent, because all violence is biological malfunction. And what this does is when the lead gets into your brain as a kid, it shrinks your medulla oblongata and it lowers your impulse control while making you more violent at the same time from a complete biological level. You can see the brain change. This is not something that is remotely in medical contention. And so what happens is those people grow up. So then as they grow up through their youth, you don't see it. So there's a violent 7-year-old, maybe he's acting up in school, but he's getting suspended at school. He's not hitting the official police radar. And once these, especially the males, are about 16, 17, they start having violence that is extreme enough,
mixed with the testosterone taken off.
Right. And they become adults and their records start hitting the actual record. So this is why you start to see them. You don't start to see their data. Because one important thing to remember is all crime is a measurement of police activity, not citizen activity. It's a police report. It has nothing to do with objective reality. So once the reports are being made, that's when you'll start to see the data that makes it look like it's real. And so you'll see this correlate all over. New York City, they attach public health and they have it tracked down to the block. And you can literally go into New York City and track block by block what they got their lead levels down to. And you will see that absolutely parallel the amount of violence from the people that were born in that damn block from whatever the amount of lead poison there was at the time. So now you ended up having in the cities still having lead paint. So then when they get the lead paint out, you get a greater reduction because you don't have the lead paint going on in the houses, but in urban areas and poor areas, you still have dilapidated buildings and stuff like that. So you have landlords where slumlords where it's not being taken care of very well. And then you end up having white flight. And white flight really is a stupid term to say. It's really elite flight, as you were pointing to earlier. So when the cities got a little crowded, messed up, people decided they were going to move out of the cities. The people that had resources were the ones that moved out of the cities. At that time, that was a greater propensity of white people. But they built a bunch of houses, and they started building those houses with PVC pipe, not with lead, not with copper, which releases the lead, and the lead gets taken out of the copper pipes. It's a chemical process. And so the houses are actually literally, so we get it out of the air, we get it out of the paint, but we still have it in lead pipes in these houses in a lot of inner cities, especially like Flint. Like Flint's like way down on the list. It's like 50 or 60 on the cities that are most lead poisoned in their pipes still. So it's not the water coming out, it's what's actually in the house. So the house has to go physically in and redone. But to give it a further example of how far this goes, lead poisoning, leaded gasoline has being used all over the world. So this actually tracks all over the world. And the last two countries just stopped doing leaded gasoline, and those were Yemen and Iraq. I mean, it's literally the strongest correlate to terrorism. It's mind blowing.
Wouldn't terrorism, though, kind of by your definition, be considered an act of aggression rather than?
It can. So part of our problem is we don't explore. So we never even ask the question, is this a biological malfunction or is this aggression? We don't even care. So a big issue of what a police investigation should involve is determining whether we're talking about a biological malfunction, which is a thing for doctors to explore and investigate and understand, versus aggression, which is a societal issue.
Going back to policy then, and policy in the inner cities, obviously inner cities oftentimes have a higher percentage of African-American Black population. So
yes, and they're not being violent because they're Black. They're being violent because they're lead poisoned.
Let me rewind this back, because rewind it back to how the system got this way. There's kind of the idea, the theory that, once slavery was abolished after the Civil War, you have this entire population of Black people that are now freed, but they're all going to basically return to the work on the plantation because that's pretty much all they do, or they start to be congregated in these cities where they subsequently have a, essentially every other piece of the population, the white people have a head start because now you're dealing with a population that doesn't have resources. You have resource inequality. And so this is how the system starts. And then the system is set up, and this kind of systemic racism is born into this and then continues obviously into the inner cities today. This is a discussion that's been had. What are your thoughts on these things? True, false, data that supports, disagrees with.
Of course, there's echoes when you trap a community. It's even weird to say community. We must be clear: Black is not a thing. Race is not real. It is entirely a social construction. It has nothing to do with DNA, and no one will even define what the hell they mean by a Black person or a white person to me. It's one of the games I play with everybody. It's just define this term. It's just not a real thing. It's an idea that was created to try and divide us into classes and subjugate us and divide us as human beings. We should be above this by now.
This is one of the ideas that you like that, I'll tell you, I'm a big fan of Billy Graham. I listen to a lot of his sermons. They're great sermons to listen to, if I'm making breakfast or something like that. I heard one of your interviews. I know that you're not a Christian, but he was very progressive at the time. In his
Jesus, the most progressive dude of all time.
Right. I know. Actually, the most anti-religious person of all time as well. I could get into.
I'm totally with you. My joke is I'm an atheist doing my best Jesus.
So, that's the thing. People think of Jesus, they think of religion. It's no, he was the most anti-religious person on the earth. Christians are some of the guiltiest people on earth when it comes to, if you want to talk about the concept of racism. But the idea that we all stem from one Adam and that we all come from essentially one race is really what it boils down to.
Yeah, literally Neanderthals are the other race. This isn't a mystery. Neanderthals are the other humanoid race. We are all the same race.
I don't know if it's another race, because then now we're splitting hairs here on species versus race versus. I'm not really sure.
No, Neanderthals. It's a race because you can interbreed.
Okay, so then where does the definition of ethnicity fall into this?
So that's where you're from. So for instance, one thing that's brought up all the time is, or say African American. So people will think that having sickle cell anemia is something with being Black, and it's not. Sickle cell anemia is a specific area of Africa because it's a biological response of the ethnicity of being in a geographic region. It was the biological response to malaria. So if you have sickle cell, you're actually more immune to getting malaria. It's a biological response, a survival response to being around all the mosquitoes and around the malaria. So if you were an African from freaking Liberia, you have none of this in you. This is not remotely connected. Everything about, in isolated areas, you have ethnicity and you have cultures and stuff. Yeah.
So then on the flip side of that, for example, in these areas, if there was white families that grew up in these areas, they also would develop the sickle cell as a defense mechanism.
Absolutely, because literally the complexion of your skin had nothing to do with this response.
What about nuances then when it comes to race of things like fast twitch versus slow twitch muscle fiber ratios and things like that.
Never seen any of it actually be anything provable. Like when you have everything from sports is all derivative of something else. So basketball and any sport is whoever plays that sport and whoever kids think they have a chance to succeed at that sport. So yeah, a lot of white kids in suburbia don't make the NBA because they're not growing up playing basketball. They don't have enough kids around them to field a damn competitive environment. Just like, I mean, Africans don't run marathons better. That's like, we literally know that throughout history. It's just that those people in that particular area, they all do that. That's their thing. So they grow up as kids and you will end up getting this kind of thing where it moves on. People play hockey or white, not because white people are better at hockey, because white people live in the cold. Like, it's all these kind of things like hockey. I don't know if you know this, but like, I think it's July. Most people that play hockey were born in July because it makes you older than it makes you the oldest kid in your age group when you're in rec. So then you get the most attention from the coaches and you're bigger and stronger by the 360 days or whatever it is. And so almost all hockey players are born in July. It's not July that makes better hockey players. Like, we really have to expand our correlations that we're looking at. These things really don't point to the things that seem like they do.
Let me circle this back around to police policy, governmental policy, and things like that. Like one of the things that Dr. Hart brought up was like you take like incarceration rates of drug users and how they're disproportionate. Like the number of drug users of any different race in the U.S. or skin color for that matter or whatever but it's a disproportionate number of incarceration rates. And then he went on further to say that, okay, well then is that not racist in nature and its policy then?
No, it's racist in outcome. That doesn't mean it has racist intent. So, I mean, that's one problem I have all the time is we should only care about if somebody has a racist outcome. We should never care about a racist intent. I mean, we're not going to like be a Minority Report and get into people's brains and try to pick out what thoughts they're allowed to have and not. So if the outcome is a product of policy, well, then it's a product of bad policy. That we have a systemic issue or an institutional issue that we need to change. If we have a racist outcome as a result of a person, we need to get rid of that person.
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying exactly.
It's not hard. I really don't think. I think we make more of it than it really is because it's like we're trying to level the playing field, and that's very immoral.
It's immoral to level the playing field.
Absolutely.
Explain
you can
this.
only level. You can. It's only moral to level the opportunity.
The playing field is the opportunity in my mind, though.
I agree with you. I mean, but that's not the worldview that other people are really looking at this as. They want to see equal outcomes, and equal outcomes aren't a thing. I mean, eventually you're going to have different outcomes with different people and different groups, whether it's going to be localized or not. It's just going to be coincidental that they happen to live near one another and they have certain hobbies. Like, dirt bike riding illegal is a big thing in Baltimore, but that's not a thing in Louisiana. I don't fucking know why, but it's not like it's because they're black in Baltimore. They're black in New Orleans too.
If the policies are designed then to create
they're not designed. I would object to them being designed.
They're not designed to create inequality, racial inequality.
I don't think so.
But the outcome oftentimes becomes racially unequal. Correct?
Sure, and we should investigate why that is.
Then give me some thoughts on why that would be that way.
Okay, well, I mean, so I'll give you so we always have, I don't think there's actually like racial disparity. I think it's not true. So by you saying, so for instance, saying, do more black kids get arrested for drug possession than white kids? Yes. But it's not because they're black. The actual thing that's taking place is people who live in the proximity of violence are more likely to get arrested. Yes, black is not the correlate.
But then it just so happens that
it is a correlate, but it's not the causation. I mean,
got you. The causation is the fact that they live in the neighborhoods near violence.
Right, and then society, their very neighbors, their mothers and their grandmothers pay people to lock them up when they're near violence. I mean, it's like I one of my big objections is when people act like I had any ill intent. I'm like, dude, have you seen my record? I have almost no complaints. I ascended through the ranks with no problems. All I ever did was what the damn black people in Baltimore asked me to do. What are you talking about? It's their policies that are racist. I mean, how do black people create policies that then get blamed on white people for being racist? Make any sense? I worked entirely for black people my entire career.
All your superiors in the chain of command?
Yeah, and the city, a black city, my chain of command. And for a time period there, I always joke about it because literally my sergeant, lieutenant, major, deputy major, colonel, deputy commissioner, commissioner, United States attorney, mayor, district attorney, president were all black. How could I possibly be blamed for anything?
In the class supremacy, then, what percentage of the elite class is of non-white heritage?
I mean, we got to get a society to understand that white and black are not real. So, I mean, like, even when you're talking about what police do, like when we say, oh, the police, locked up 50 black people and they only locked up 20 white people, they're literally telling that person they're black. They're checking the box and labeling the person black. It's not even like a self-reporting thing.
But like perception is truth, right?
No.
Oh, if I perceive you to be white, then in my mind, you're white.
No.
Come on, man. Why
No,
not?
I'm not white. I don't identify as white. Eat a dick.
I identify you as white. That's my problem.
Yeah.
If collectively I identify you as white and this guy does and that lady does and this whole group of people identify you as white.
Room full of idiots that don't understand reality.
But what if that room full of idiots becomes an entire society?
Yeah, I get it. Then you're a room full of idiots that are punishing people immorally. I get it.
Yeah, but then when the room full of idiots, when that society becomes the majority.
Sure, if I start calling you gay, you don't have to start.
This is very true.
It doesn't matter what you call me. I don't care what you call me. It's irrelevant. It's only relevant if I allow it to be. One is never offensive. You can only be offended. I mean, I can say whatever I want. I can say all these words to you. And if you're offended, dude, that's on you. You know, I mean it only as a moral point.
If the groupthink just happens to be that, like if you're identified with a certain color or race, you're white because of your skin tone. And this person's black because of their skin tone. And
yeah, but most people don't agree with you that skin tone determines whiteness and blackness. Are albino people white? It's so easy to disprove it at every step. It's not a real thing. And so whenever you classify and you group anybody in something, at least make it real. When we're saying that there's going to be sexism, there's always going to be sexism because males and females are just a scientific thing. But we don't have to have genderism because you create it.
I will say this about the albino example. Having been a teacher and having been in a high school where I've met albino black kids, they are oftentimes not accepted by their peers of the.
But colorism is vastly more aggressive in black communities than anywhere else.
So we're not using the word race, we're using colorism?
I mean, you can, but I'm telling you, within most black communities, and I always will do quotes because I don't believe they're a black community. I will tell them to their face, you've heard me do it. I will tell somebody that says, I'm black. I'll go, you're not black. It's not a thing. Sorry. It's just not. If I can find other people that identify as black that completely disagree with what your definition of black is. Everybody, eventually, with enough questions, their definition is going to break down. They're not going to agree on what a black person is. Just like the cops like the albino person, when he gets locked up, does the cop write white or black? I don't know. Who knows? So what's that data in the jail system? We shouldn't be asking people their race.
What do they write in that case? What have cops you've known read?
Whatever the cop wants to write, and so like in Baltimore, the top box is black. So how many times do you think lazy ass cops literally checked black on a white dude?
Yeah,
I know that when millions of things are done, there will always be a percentage of them. So you are talking with millions of cops writing millions of interactions. There are literally millions of people who are misidentified racially.
Let me ask you this. These policies are not designed to create racial outcomes necessarily, but these outcomes.
Well, in the past, I mean, we have some echoes. So when you're talking about lead poisoning, yeah, like red line neighborhoods are definitely more lead poison. So did this start from that? Hell yeah.
Okay, so you've been very outspoken about this. You've talked about things like civilian-led policing, for example.
Sure. I mean, so basically what civilian-led policing, though, is one of the biggest frustrations in all my activism I hate saying I'm an activist. I'm really not an activist. I just like to answer questions. But one of the biggest things that I've ever found is I'm not sure I've come across any problem that isn't easily solvable by the person that's literally bitching to me about it. And I just find this everywhere. Whenever we say we're having problems, they're really not that hard to solve. We just literally don't do it. And it drives me insane. Like, as I said about classifying, because you start classifying and living by this reality that race is real, which is genetically and scientifically, anyone can type it into Google. Every freaking geneticist in the entire world will explain to you that race is not real. But as long as you go and you continue that lie, you will divide people. You will create a lesser than and an us versus them reality. And that shit just it frustrates me to no end.
Okay, so then hold on, I'm wrangling you back in here on the
Saying
civilian
if you want to fix the
civilian.
policy, if you want to fix the redlined issue from the past, all you have to do is create policy like New York did and get rid of the lead. It's easy. It is in the science, hands down, no question, that if you get lead out of your neighborhood, you will parallel something like what New York did. New York got their lead levels lower than every other city in the entire nation, and shocker, they literally became the safest city in the entire nation. And it is right in front of everyone's faces, and no one cares. And so civilian-led policing was a bunch of people always saying, well, we don't know of any other way to police. And I'm like, what are you talking about? So I went and got a PhD in management so I could lay out that just in the managerial field, there was like 15 fucking good ideas. And I put those things together and put some of those in the civilian-led policing. So if management has those answers, well, teaching has some of those answers. MMA has some of those answers. Look outside of your religion of policing, and you will find answers. Just do something.
So then does the whole policing paradigm have to change then?
All I think we have to do is start fighting the actual causes of violence. That we're afraid of violence, and what we do is we fight the perception of violence, because that's what people care about. They don't care about actually being safe. They care about that they feel safe. So we live in this world where everyone cares about feelings and not objective safety. Get the lead out of the water, separate rich and poor. If you really want, it kind of sounds a little immoral, but if you want to get violence down, that will do it. And reduce policing, because policing is the third correlate of violence, because society literally said, we're going to use this aggression, it's actually aggression, and we're going to use this aggression to address this violence and aggression. We can literally reduce all these things extremely easily.
All right.
No one's trying. No one cares. I went around the nation and went to like 42 cities, and we talked to all these people. We explained it all to them, but all they want is the damn power. And so every battle about policing that you have ever heard in the last 7 years did not come down whatsoever to changing policing. It comes down to being in control of policing.
Which is not necessarily racist in nature. It's just because you don't care who you're controlling, just as long as you're controlling somebody.
Yeah, it's generally like, what are all the cities that we're talking about? All these cities are Black Democrat cities. It's literally the people complaining doing it to themselves, because this is the reality that we're in. We want to be in that thing, and it's a psychological thing that blows my mind, frustrates me to no end, and I have no idea how to deal with.
You made a comment about this, the thought, like the perception of safety versus actual real safety, and the thought of people willing to give up liberties over the perception of safety per se.
Yeah. I mean, I'm the type of person that says that agrees that if you're going to give up your liberty for safety, you don't deserve your liberty nor your safety. I am totally with that. I don't think that you can be protected from threats from the outside. All you can do is hope that and do things so they don't happen to somebody else. That's justice. That's almost like that mindset that we have, that where all justice is vengeance. And vengeance for the victim, revenge from society. And I don't think that could be the definition of justice. It has to be making all efforts to make sure that situation never occurs again. It doesn't matter whether you lock that person up for the rest of their lives or you take all their money. The real thing that matters when Tamir Rice is killed from the police, the real thing that matters is from the police side, what do we do to not make sure this ever happens again? And from the community side, what do we do to never make sure this happens again? I mean, it's like, how else, like locking up and being the eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth, that's obviously not, this is basics.
The problem, I mean, we have a social construct where people demand that kind of stuff. Like,
I agree.
I don't think that Dr. Michael Wood coming in saying like, listen, if you don't want this to happen again, let's get the lead out of the water.
Yeah, I agree, and I don't know how to win that argument, because that's basically what I'm trying to say.
Let's shift gears a little bit here. What do you do in your free time? What do you do for fun, man?
Okay, so now where I'm literally sitting in the RV we just bought because
nice.
I'm trying to like totally break up society. My wife owns a photography company. So now I mostly do videos and do weddings with her and go out and see real people and interact with real people on a real level and try to turn social media off as much as I possibly can, and try to handle things on a more pragmatic measure, having discussions. One mistake I think I really made was trying and like having these discussions on a big scale when they like nobody was really ready for them.
But you know what though? I think it takes somebody like you to do that, to kickstart that. There's always got to be that first that's like that's really, we'll call it progressive in
I'm
nature.
fine with
Yeah,
that from the
that's
intended definition of the word.
yeah, intended definition of the word. But no, I mean, to kind of put these theories out there so that it makes people think outside of the box. Like I said, the conversation I had with Dr. Hart was very it made me think outside of the box of all my preconceived notions of drugs growing up and all
Sure.
that kind of thing, how it related to crime and all that kind of stuff. So it's like it takes that kind of stuff to get people thinking. And who knows? You never know if this will have a ripple effect on down the road where you were the one that planted the seed and that seed grew
I
into.
certainly hope so, but look at what I'm watching. What I'm watching is people bastardize and entirely misinterpret what we were talking about to their own ends and create an escalation of violence because the local instability has obviously dramatically risen. I never said shit about getting rid of police. I've always talked about reforming and changing what we do. You obviously can't take the lid off the can and expect the stuff not to spill out. I mean, right now, I know that the movement towards police reform has caused, or at least is directly attached, I mean, to hundreds of kids being killed. Hundreds and thousands of more murders than we were on a pace for in the way things were. I mean, is it a bumpy road on the path to a better end? I certainly hope so. But I am a data-driven person, and I'm seeing violence in Seattle rise by 400%. I'm seeing murders in Portland double. I'm seeing New York go back to its old ways. I'm watching Baltimore be the same shit. And it's like, oh man, I don't know what like. And at the same time, when all of this discussion started, the police were killing about 40 unarmed people per year, and now it's down to single digits. And so whatever the actual argument was when changing the mentality of the police, man, dude, I don't know if seven unarmed people isn't the floor. That might be the floor.
Actually attaining zero is not possible, not
Obviously,
statistically
that's not
possible.
possible. I
Yeah.
mean, if you can't go send me out there, I'm like, eventually, I'm going to fail. I mean, I'm not going to have perfect outcomes all the time.
So you and your wife, you stay in the Phoenix area in the RV, or do you travel all over the country?
No, we just got it. So we're going to go out. We do weddings all over the place. And so we're going to go out and talk to more people. Before, I was like going and talking to politicians when I went to all these places and kind of meeting more with activists. And that was like, and the whole like Twitter world, like all of that stuff, like Chappelle said recently, I don't give a fuck because Twitter ain't real. It really, I
Yeah.
mean, it's not. All of that stuff was so disconnected from the real world. And I really want to get back to the real world and talking to people like that and having more intimate relationship.
Yeah, that's I was shocked because I was going through your YouTube channel and then I found found some wedding videos and I was like, because Grace had told me, he's like, no, he does like does videography work, production, and I was like, so I was looking and I see some of the wedding videos. I'm like, you do good drone work, by the way, man. Like
Oh,
your
thanks. Yeah.
drone.
I mean, that was a lot to learn and it's really cool. The drones are awesome.
You guys like want to travel across the country? You have a daughter, yes?
Yeah, I have a daughter, and so she's going off to college soon. This is like our plan.
Oh,
We're just
okay.
easing into this whole. We're out of here.
Oh, so
We're gonna kind of do
you
our
guys
own
are
thing.
empty nesters, man. Like you've
I know it feels good to be an
that's
early empty nester.
that's crazy. I mean, I know you're several years younger than me, but you don't look old enough to have a daughter that's heading off to college. I just got to say that. So, do you guys? I mean, you guys plan on just like touring the whole country type of thing, like using this as.
Yeah, wherever we do weddings and where things call us. I mean, I definitely want to go to Alaska. I really want to see Aurora Borealis in person. I haven't done that yet, so I want to
Yeah,
make the trek all the way up there.
yeah. I've not seen that either. It's one of the things I have
And
not
just
seen.
like, all those kind of things in life. I kind of miss that from the Marine Corps. It's like traveling around the Marine Corps and seeing different things and always being on adventures. It's like, I kind of want to go back to that a little bit. I don't want to, I think a lot of people are afraid of dying and like, dude, I'm afraid of not living. And that's a change I have to make. And I'm trying to convince other people around me to do it. They all get caught up in competing with the Joneses and trying to get your way about stuff. But man, I don't know. I don't know if life is really about all that stuff,
It's not, man. You know, like it's funny. Like you claim not to be a man that necessarily believes in God or whatever, but you sound somewhat Christian in your nature, bro. I'm just gonna.
I am very open about that. When I say doing my best Jesus, I don't mean it
I
sarcastically.
don't
I mean, if Christians acted like Jesus, you would have zero complaints out of me.
exactly. But you know, I'll tell you, that's one of the things, man. Like with my career, for example, I did a good job of not drifting down that path, and I could see it start to happen in me a little bit where, you know, once you start reaching that upper echelon in the athletic world, and it's like you see other people buying nice cars, you want to buy nice cars, you see other people
Right.
living in nice, you know, it's infectious. I lived in LA for a couple years, and everybody out there is like they're maxed out to the wazoo on their credit cards, trying to keep up with the Joneses and get the next big thing and the newest car and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, man, I keep life simple. I drive my F-150. I have a few toys, but more importantly, like if I'm going to allocate my resources to something, I'm allocating my resources to experiences, you know,
Yeah, totally.
being able
You
to
know,
travel. I've been to about 60 countries in this world now, seen a lot of different stuff. And, you know, I'd much rather spend some money for going snowboarding for a week than being like, hey, you know what? I'd like to get that new car or
I feel
something
like
like that, you know?
sometimes I talk to people and they think it's so cool that like I hung out with Joe Rogan and did podcasts and met all those people, and it's like, but dude, by the end of the day, I would have been much happier around a campfire with you telling bullshit stories.
Absolutely, man.
You know, and I don't know what to make of that really.
You know what the thing is, man, is I think that a lot of people end up living their entire life only to realize that at the end of the day, you know, because I was listening to a motivational speech last week by Denzel Washington. I love listening to that guy, man. He's so level headed. And he says, you know, he said, I've been to a lot of funerals in my life. He said, but one thing you'll never see behind the hearse is a U-Haul because you can't take any of it with you. You know, at the end of the day, man, you're going to be laying on your deathbed. It's like nobody cares about what car you drove or any of that kind of stuff. It's about the relationships that you formed in this world, like who you were there for, whether you were the kind of person that someone could count on, what changes you made, what kind of legacy you may leave on in this earth or whatever, you know, and we're judged by the actions we do, the words we say, and all that kind of stuff, you know. And so those are the things that are really important at the end of the day. You know, these material objects I've never met anybody that's like old in life and you say, what's the key to longevity? And they're not like, make sure you get that Ferrari.
Totally. I knew where that was going. I
Right?
mean, yeah, I mean, who does that? You know, everyone wishes they would have done something, wishes they would have had the life. And I'm like, it sounds dumb too. Like my dog died in December, and we have a new puppy now.
What kind of
But
dog?
it was like boxers.
Okay,
So
okay.
just a boxer person.
I
So
can
it
deal with
was
that.
like
That's a respectable dog. If you're gonna say like a teacup Yorkie or something, like you don't
no,
look
no, no, no,
a
no,
Baltimore
no.
former Baltimore cop
Manly
ring.
dog, come
Yeah,
on,
yeah, come on.
come
Okay, okay, gotcha. Yeah.
So it's like when our new dog, he's a boy, so he's freaking crazy. But it's like if I'm hanging out with him and he's whining about this, and if I'm on the internet playing with something, or it's like tell him no and not go play with him or not do that walk. That with my other dog, if I could go back and do that for every time that I was on Twitter, dude, I would totally do that. I wouldn't have been on there. I wouldn't have been texting whomever or freaking trying to set up whatever podcast. I really wouldn't have been. I would have just gone out there with her and spent that time, and that time was fleeting. And I'm not going to make those mistakes again.
You know, I'll say this. You and I have a very similar mindset, but I will say that I've been guilty of one thing in my life, and that's that um, when I think about retiring and not having to work, like I always say that what I want in this world is freedom, and I want freedom of thought. I want to wake up in the morning and not be beholden to, oh man, I got to do this report or I got to send that email or I got, you know, it's like I
Mhm.
have the freedom of thought. Like I want to be able to just get up, make my cup of tea, sit on my Adirondack chair, start a little bonfire in the brisk November weather of Ohio and
Hell
just,
yes.
you know, and just sit there and chill. And if I feel like sitting there for 5 minutes because I'm like, man, I got to get to the gym, or if I feel like sitting there for 45 minutes, I can, because I have the freedom of thought. I would say the one thing I've been guilty of in my life is that I have a moving goalpost. So whatever my
Mhm.
goalpost was 10 years ago, it's moved. But now I've become very cognizant of this moving goalpost. I'm like, well, I don't want to get caught up in that trap of, you know, when is enough type of thing.
Totally.
But for me, you know, I think like when I say I want freedom of thought, the problem that what's going to happen to me is I'm going to become what I call psychologically unemployable, because once I quit,
I'm already there.
yeah, right. Okay, so you know exactly what I'm talking about, because
100%.
yeah, once you quit working, like once you stop the system, you can't go back to it. I mean, for example, I used to teach high school math. The thought of me going back and teaching at this point in time, like
Oh,
literally
how scary is that?
somebody say
Oh,
somebody looking at me and going, Franklin, you're supposed to be in the building at 7:30. And I'm just like,
right,
well, I got here at 7:45. Like, what are you going to do about it? Right. Like, it's
right.
just, that's the mentality of me at this age, when I was,
I know I can't. I know
yeah.
it. I
So
couldn't do it.
that's the whole point. It's like I have to make sure I have enough to reach the finish line to get to that goalpost. Because if I don't, man, once I become psychologically unemployable, once I hit that, if I end up running out of money on the 10-yard line before I hit the goal line, I'm screwed because there is no going back to work for me.
I'm excited to steal that though. That's what I'm gonna tell people now. I'm psychologically unemployable. Don't even waste your time.
It's true. You know what it means. I mean, you get it. You get it.
One of the
So
biggest lessons I have learned in all of the access and doors I have been behind is that every single one of these doors I got behind, what was I expected to be there was not there. And I think that's the case. I don't think that's unique to me. Whatever it is that somebody like fantasizes or thinks is the gold at the end of the rainbow, when you get and you peek behind that door, it's not gold and it's not a rainbow that you actually want. Like the and when I thought, oh, well, like, oh, police can do a good job. All we got to do is go out there and do a better job, be better de-escalators. And you go and you peek behind the door, and you're like, that's fucking people are poisoned. What? Like that's what the answer is. What are you talking? Like everything is that way.
I'm assuming this applies to like personal goals and stuff as well. Then for you,
Of course,
yeah.
I wanted success. I thought of nothing like more important than like being a cop, and I thought you could do so much change in it. And I thought all these things were these fruitful paths, but they were really just like. I mean, what was I? I was a hired mercenary. I mean, that's what I was since I was 17. I mean, that when you step back, you're like, wait a minute. I just signed up to be willing to kill people for my adult life, and that was society's way to transition me from low class to middle class and say thank you.
Thank you for your service.
Wow, that's a bitter pill to swallow. I don't know about that.
Yeah. No, I'll tell you a personal story. Actually one of the loneliest days of my career was the day that I won my title, because I had been on this pursuit for this title for so long.
Sure.
Just training and training. And what I realized, like the day that happened, is that I was so fixed on the goal that I didn't really get to enjoy that journey the way that I should have. And like,
Sure.
remember the
Sure.
night that I won my belt? I tell this oftentimes. Like, I'll tell this story if I'm giving like a motivational talk sometimes or something like that. But the night that I won my belt, I went from an arena of like 12,000 fans just screaming whatever to and this was at a time where I could actually literally like walk out of the arena and walk to my hotel and not be fairly left left alone fairly normally. And I remember when I got to my hotel room, it was me and my wife was there, and a couple, like maybe two or three of my coaches / training partners, and there's like four of us in the hotel room. And I just remember I took my belt and I set it down on the bed, and I stood over top of my bed and I was staring at this belt, and I thought, like, man, I don't feel like a champion, like, because nothing
Mhm.
changed other than I had this shiny new toy. That was it. And what I realized was I had been motivated extrinsically by this shiny toy, this belt.
Mhm.
And now that I had it, I was like, well, but nothing's different. And
Right.
so
The
it was,
beauty was in the journey.
yeah, and I really missed out on a lot of that journey, and it took that event to actually get me to appreciate everything that I was going through at the time. Everything from the things you don't appreciate, like that extra round of conditioning, to the
Mhm.
things you do appreciate, like a 5-year-old kid stopping you and asking you for your autograph, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, totally think about how important that moment is. So think of that reflection that kid. He was like, "Oh my God, look! This is so crazy!" And what a moment that was. You kind of pass those things by. I feel the exact same way, and I kind of got focused in with the creative arts and things like that. But I do ceramics and all kinds of other art projects, and a lot of people there they get wrapped up in the outcome of the project, and I'll be like 90% of the way through a project and be like, shit, it's not going the way I want, and I'll just throw it away. And they freak out. And it's like, dude, it's the process of making it. The whole journey of getting here is the reward. If you're caught on the outcome, you're really in a bad path because all positive outcomes came from you being stagnant. It's a hard thing to understand, but the only way you ever evolve and learn is when you fail. So when you actually succeed, it's completely empty because all you ever did was confirm your own ego. And that just doesn't pan out, and it's really weird. But I try to explain it to people all the time, and it's like when they're not upset that they're upset that I'm not upset by failure, and it's like no, like I learned. If I didn't fail, I literally didn't progress.
I tell anybody that's listening to my podcast, they'll hear me say this from time to time, but oftentimes I take dry erase markers and I write quotes on my mirror, something that I can read in the morning or something before I go to bed at night. And at one point in time, I wrote like on the mirror, because I was going through tough times in my life, and I just write, thank you, God, for the trials and tribulations that I have to go through in this world, because it's those tribulations that separate me from the ordinary man, because ordinary
Mhm.
men crumble in times of tribulation, and that's the truth. I mean, it's like going into the gym and working out or something like that. The only way you can make a muscle grow is by putting it under stress. And people hear me say this all the time. And so, unfortunately, nobody likes to go through these growth periods in their life necessarily. They don't like going through them. They just like the outcome at the end. But the unfortunate thing is that we have to go through those kinds of things in order to get
Yeah,
there.
and I can't tell you how many times you sit there and you're like, damn. All right, I learned.
Exactly.
But definitely, if anyone wants to take anything from me and what I've been through and thinks anything I've said is interesting, it's that everything that you think you want to do or would like to change is actually very easy to change and well within your capabilities if you just go do it. I won't fight your battles for you, but I'll tell you how to get them done. People don't tend to do them. You can do them. All of these things, whether it's going out and RVing or living your life and not getting caught up in social media or wanting to change policing in your local neighborhood, all of these mechanisms are in place, and society for some reason has told you that they're not, and I don't know why. You can literally achieve anything you want to no matter who you are in this country. Nothing has fucking changed from that.
I mean, I think society tells people that sometimes, but it's the social constructs, even within the home, man. Like
Yeah,
we're born, like we're taught that, oh man, go to college, get that safe job, don't take chances. Even for
right.
me, when I decided to, after I had my degrees and I decided to walk away from teaching to pursue an athletic career, my dad, I was the only kid in my family to graduate from college, and my dad literally, like, he and I graduated university the same year, and he looked at me like, what are you doing? You are throwing away your education, your future. And I think in his mind, I also kind of like pissed on everything that he respected as far as education, because he had to work his tail off to go back to school and get his degrees. And so for me to
Mhm.
just be like, yeah, that was fun and cool, and hey, I had good time teaching, high five that out, but I'm gonna go do this other thing here. So but that's what we're taught. We're taught that way, like, hey, take the safe route and do whatever. But no, I like your philosophy on that, man, because it is,
Yeah,
everything's
man, don't
achievable.
do it. Don't
Yep.
take the safe route.
No,
It's just
man.
not. It's not rewarding. I don't care what anybody tells you. Success actually isn't rewarding.
Listen, that's an awesome lesson to leave people on. I'll say this: let me know when you're in Ohio, man. Like when you're in Ohio.
Absolutely, brother.
Thanks for coming on, man. I had fun conversation with you.
All right, brother. Be safe, man.
Awesome. Yeah, you take care.
Quite Franklin is providing this podcast as a public service, but it is neither a legal interpretation nor legal advice, nor a statement of Quite Franklin policy. Reference to any specific product or entity does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation of that product or entity by Rich Franklin or Quite Franklin. The views expressed by guests on the podcast are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. Views and opinions expressed by Quite Franklin employees or representatives are the views and opinions of the persons expressing them, and do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of Quite Franklin or any of its officials or principals. Nothing heard on this podcast at any time is medical advice or is intended as medical advice. The listener must always consult his or her personal physician or other qualified medical professional regarding any questions of a medical nature. If you have any questions about this disclaimer, please contact our general counsel.